Right, welcome everyone. We're here again for another episode of AdBites, where we're looking to kind of lift the lid on all things Apple search ads. This podcast is brought to you by Redbox Mobile. We're an award-winning ASO and Apple search ads partner. Never met me before. I'm Samuel Chorlton. I'm the CTO at Redbox Mobile, and today I am joined by what we've termed you as app growth expert Thomas Petit, who joins me to discuss scaling challenges. So let's jump straight in. But could you just give us a little bit of a blurb about you before we talk about scaling, Thomas?
Yep, sure. Thanks, Samuel. Happy to be here and have this conversation with you today. I'm an independent. I'm a freelance. I work mainly on apps, and within that, I specialize on subscription apps mainly. So not really a big expert on gaming and so on, even if I'm always curious to learn something from my peers. That's kind of a funny thing because people from the outside would see me as a super specialist inside of a niche. But actually inside of my niche, I'm more of a generalist in the sense of I would touch on user acquisition, but also onboarding, monetization, and lots of topics around data and products. So kind of, I would summarize it as growth by the definition of intersection of marketing, product, and data. I do have a little passion hobby for Apple search ads, so I tend to do a bit more of that channel rather than other channel, and I'm happy that we dig into that today. Very happy.
Awesome. So one of the big challenges people often talk around with Apple search ads is scaling. But just to kind of set the scene for people, what does scaling mean? What does it mean to you?
I guess for a lot of people, scaling means they want to spend more on it, and they want it to be a bigger share of their marketing mix. For some actors, spending more means also more commission. So I would personally not define it so much by ad spend, but rather by the outcome and the revenue I'm making, which I'm more interested. If it costs me half to make the same revenue, I'll take it as a win. But I mean, that's not scaling, but still good. And there is also an aspect of let's say coverage in the App Store, like kind of visibility in the App Store that I think is not fully encompassed in only the bottom line. So for me, that would be scaling my revenue, hopefully profitably, but also scaling how much visibility I get in the App Store and the 600 something millions people that open the App Store every week, and how much visibility I can get in front of them through search, through other placement, how much they can see me, because it can have an impact as well. So I would define it this way. Yeah. Most people say spend, I say revenue and visibility.
Yeah, I think visibility is a really important part. I mean, you kind of need one to achieve the other, but it's important to kind of provide some degrees of separation around that. So I guess, why do people see scaling, especially in Apple search ads, as such a challenging thing? What would you kind of catalog as the main challenges?
I guess part of it is the nature of what Apple search ads is the name says search, and initially the only placement were in the search part of the App Store. There are other tabs in there, and search by nature, not only on Apple, it's true on the Google Play, it's true on Google.com or Bing or whatever. There's only a finite amount of people who search for queries that are relevant to your activity. So by nature, it puts a ceiling on how much you can do there. That ceiling doesn't really exist on channels that are, let's say, paid social or like social networks or display, because you're not fighting for specific terms, you're fighting for attention in given moments. So it's very different in nature. And I think that's one of the limits, is you have to be aware of the nature of the channel itself. That being said, I don't think many people have reached that ceiling. Like, there is a ceiling, but it's a high ceiling. There's still a lot of it there. The second, I guess, factor for like people having a saying, I want more of it, because this is what scaling means, no? Is what performance they're expecting. And I guess if everybody wants to scale and say, I want more of it, It means that they're getting decent results from it. But very often it's us who put ourselves our own limit. Like, how far am I really to push it to get more of this visibility, more share of voice, more of all of it. And on specific vertical, it's true that the competitiveness is really high. Like, because I don't remember exact numbers, but I was looking at adoption figures on Apple Search Ads, and like a vast majority of apps that do any kind of advertising, they are on Apple Search Ads, and they're trying to fight for the terms that are relevant for them. And in some verticals, it can be a little bit brutal in terms of how hard it is on the short tail to, I mean, if everybody wants the same placement, of course, the price is going to go up. This is just like normal offer and demand mechanics. So I guess those are the limits, kind of the nature of the placement and the fact that in some vertical, it can be very competitive.
And I guess in terms of the opportunity of that pool is dependent on the product that Apple to create. So the more people that buy iPhones dictates the size of the pool that everyone's able to compete over. And yeah, I mean, we see that as well. There is a ceiling. You can't exceed the ceiling because the traffic doesn't exist. So then you've got to look at other ways that people might be able to provide some degrees of association between their search terms. So, I mean, I guess one way to look at scaling is talking about what does it rely on? How do we make sure that you can be relevant to the search terms? You've got any kind of thoughts around that?
Yeah, I guess like there are a few factors here that are like in how much you can scale. Well, the first one are the terms themselves, like, and how far you've explored. I mean, on mobile, search is typically a shorter tail. So people look for 1 or 2 words, not like on google.com where people would look at, how do I lose weight in 6 months? Like, you'll never see that kind of query in the App Store. Like, it's a lot more like concentrated on a few search terms to continue the energy of health and fitness. Fitness, workout tracker, lose weight, but not how to lose weight in 6 months or how to lose 8 pounds. So like, it's more concentrated. The thing is, maybe you're focusing just on that, and that's one core of the focus. On the short tail, how much share of voice you're grabbing, like on these high volume terms that everybody wants, how much visibility you're getting on them. So you get search of share of voice reports where you can estimate, oh, I'm at 30% on this, so there's still like a 3x potential, or maybe you're at 90+%, and that keyword is covered. There's not much more you can do for that particular keyword, but that would be the first one. I do a segue. I remember myself saying a couple of times, I need more human beings to search, like when I hit that part. So this is one. The other one would be how far you've explored other terms, because even though it's a bit short term, there's always more keywords research than one can think. Like, even I see accounts where I have 10,000 keywords and I'm still discovering things that are more or less relevant to our activity. There's also a point of relevancy of the term itself to what you're doing. And I know a couple apps that are like, I don't know, yeah, we're a fasting app, how relevant it is to fitness. Or I'm a yoga app, maybe a workout is partly relevant, even if it's not done. So you would have like terms that are really the core, that are really matching what you're doing, really matching the USP, extremely relevant to what you're proposing to users. Those are the first ones you want to battle on. But as you try to expand, there are also terms that are loosely related, that are also partly relevant, even if not as much. And because you're less relevant, maybe it's a bit harder for you to get the visibility, or even if you track the traffic, it might convert a little bit less. So here you need to make quite a bit of an equation of how far can I push it. But I think in terms of exploring terms, there are always new things that can be your own research. That's where the discovery campaigns are for also, exploring new terms that you haven't found by yourself. I think is one great way to expand, but not the only one. Discovery campaign will not find for you everything that is potentially relevant. So you have to explore different ways to do that. And the last one, I'd say, is once you have all these terms, more or less relevant with each their own volume, how relevant you are for the term. And so do users want to click on you? Like, is your USP interesting enough? Because obviously, if they don't, you're going to get charged more for it. Like, this is not, I mean, this is how Apple works to some extent. It's also all other search product work the same. You have to increase the relevancy of what you're doing, and you have to increase the bids. I mean, the auction works with level of bids and level of relevancy. So those are the two factors you have to play with. The relevancy, there's a bunch of tools, and I think we're going to discuss a little bit more about that, I guess. The bid level is, and maybe to wrap it up, is your own capability to be willing to scale, in the sense of, we put ourselves our own ceiling in terms of, okay, my goal of profitability is X. I want a ROAS of 200%, or I want to pay each event $20 or whatever it is. And there's a moment that this is our own limit. Like, we put our own limit. Maybe if I could afford to pay $30 for the event and not 20, then I could cover more because I can simply bid more. Like, the bid is obviously a very important factor in this. It's not the only one, though.
Yeah, and I think one of the things people need to be conscious of, especially when looking at keyword relevancy, is if you're an emergent brand that people might not know to search for, going for very targeted keywords is probably not a very sensible place to start. You may want to look at either competitor-focused campaigns if that market already exists, and if the market doesn't exist, you've got generic terms. But then you're starting to look at, okay, actually maybe search is a challenging environment. And I guess that's kind of a useful kind of segue to start talking about Apple have now kind of diversified into more display-based advertisements, still somewhat limited, but they're starting to look into that. Where do you kind of see those fitting into the picture?
Yeah, I guess you made a really good connection here. There are some verticals that by nature, they're not search driven. Like, some verticals are heavily search driven. There are a lot of people searching for travel related terms, for example, in generic or even in the health and fitness that we mentioned before. A lot of people would look for fitness, for workout and so on. There's a big need. I work with a few apps which USP does not have this. People do not think of searching the App Store for what they're doing. And it's true that in this case, one way is to put more emphasis on competitive campaign. But there's a moment, if the nature of what your vertical is doing, not just your app, but it's a vertical related thing, you're never gonna, it's not gonna end with search. And I think in this sense, very useful for this vertical with less search. For Apple, there's a moment where the ads were only on search, and it's not like they're going to put 4 ads in a row in there like some others are doing. And so they were probably looking at how they can expand the inventory. And so we had these 3 new placements that I would qualify more as display placement, simply because they're not related to a search term in particular, that enabled for them to expand the inventory and I guess grow their own bottom line. But for us developers have alternative means to gain that visibility in the App Store outside of purely search terms. So I think here, some potential for both sides, both for Apple and for us. It kind of makes sense in the. I mean, this product is only 6.5 years old. Started only on search. Then we have 3 new placement. I want to believe that there's a couple of new placements that will appear in the future, but for now it's all about exploring this kind of relatively new possibility. The display placement, they're not that old, and I think they've been quite under-tapped by a lot of people for a bunch of reasons we can explore. So I guess it's very valid for this niche app with less search, but also very valid for apps that have a lot of search, but they've hit the position where they can't push more, or they've already explored what they could on search. And one way of scaling is clearly those new placements where, because they're not initiated by search, and in the case of the Today tab, it's not in the search tab, so there's even more people reaching it. There's really a massive reach potential on that placement. To gain that visibility and scale the account in terms of scalability and visibility and hopefully revenue, like we said at the beginning.
I mean, they're kind of creating a kind of microcosm of advertising in a bigger sense. I mean, it's been known for a long time that the more interactions people have with your brand, the more likely they are to want to interact with your brand. And Apple are kind of reflecting that within the confines of the App Store. And this is kind of why Apple is so heavily evangelizing the message of utilize all of the product placement opportunities together. That's not necessarily being reflected in the market yet, but the messaging is clear, and they want that kind of to be pursued. I think from our experience, some of that reticence from clients is around the ability to track the incremental gains when you're using that as a collated approach. Have you got any thoughts or advice to people that might be listening around how they might be able to track that?
Yeah, that's so the first thing, I never say track. I do not use that word. I use the word measurement. I'm not tracking anything. I'm just measuring the efficiency of campaign. Yeah, same thing, just different word. Here, when you think about that, it's kind of, I don't think it's specific to Apple. Like, if you look at the whole marketing strategy, yes, some advertiser will go just for direct return, immediate impact, last click measurement of return on ad spend they have. Most of bigger brands have marketing budgets that try to have touch points in different places. Some a lot more on the top of the funnel, where they do not expect a click, they do not expect an instant conversion. It's more of a long-term brand building, or something you do on the side of this campaign that are going to grab the fruits and generate the conversion, and it goes side by side. And I think it goes beyond Apple, that there are always measurement complexities in evaluating how efficient this budget that is not generating a direct conversion is. In the case of the app stores, and I think we totally have this, it's not only happening there. Obviously, those placement on display, and in particular, I think they're a bit different between the three of them. The Today tab would be probably the most like top funnel, awareness, visibility driven placement that is maybe not likely to generate an instant click and install and conversion, but it's more you're building this relationship. And when those placements appear, at least among the advertisers that I work with, a lot of people who are only there for the direct return. They put a bit of test budget on it, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not seeing the conversion with direct click measurement." So the way we measure Apple Search Ads, or like the API is called Ad Services, would assign, "Oh, that person has clicked and it's generated a conversion." And it's true that the direct return on investment on this placement is quite hard to achieve by itself. But I also think this approach just doesn't match the nature of the placement, where a lot of the effect will not be immediately on a click. And I guess here the easy to say but hard to do answer is to run more incrementality analysis and media mix modeling, having periods where you invest more, some zero, and look at the effect overall without having to be reliant on deterministic attribution, or to say it in another word, on is this last click the one that has produced the conversion, but actually participating in creating more conversion, but also more demand. And here, I think there's an added thing that, so I'd say level 1, you're only measuring direct returns. Level 2, you're trying to estimate the overall impact on what's happening. It's obviously not so easy because there's a lot of things happening, seasonality, you're changing other channels at the same time and so on. But also because there is you cannot measure the incrementality on a tiny budget. If every day you're spending 100 and you put 1 on this placement, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to measure anything at all, just because it's going to be drawn inside of the rest. So there's kind of a minimum amount to see the difference. There's also a minimum time. Like, you can't expect to go for 1 day and have like this kind of awareness building that you're trying to build on a long term. There's kind of a tricky business to seize it properly. There's a last part. So let's say, level 2, you're trying to evaluate the aspect overall. There's a part that I wasn't focusing too much on this until earlier this year, where if you spend enough on this, let's say more awareness placement or display placement, in some case, not always, I don't want to like sell anything here, but in some case you would see that actually the number of search for your app is increasing. Just not the overall impact, but kind of has a positive effect on your search campaign. And that could be maybe because more people search for your brand because they remember it from having seen it in the placement. Or that could be when they search for a term and they see you, they do remember because it's not the first touch. So is your CTR growing alongside? Are there more search about your app? And those, they're not easy to measure very precisely. But over the long term, with enough budget, you start seeing the effect. Everyone should measure, is it interesting enough for me? Like, is this budget coming back in this form? But assuming it's all going to come back in terms of the last click is fooling oneself. This is not how those placements work. It's pretty clear.
And I think that's one of the challenges with search ads clients is they're very expectant of quick return in terms of the information providing detail around whether things have been successful. And as you start to move and widen the offering within Apple Search Ads, you've got to think of it less as the traditional PPC type environment and think of it more as a combined kind of display ad and click-based advertisement. And you've got to look and understand a lot more around consequential effects and all of those sorts of things, which play a really key role. And I think part of that is allowing things time to evolve and allowing yourself time to experiment, because that's the only way you're going to ascertain whether something has the desired effect, and starting to be slightly more scientific in your approach around it. Because yeah, you've got to look at the other ad placements going on, you've got to look at what's going on in the market around it, because all of these things have knock-on effects. And the longer you run that over, the more the noise gets cancelled out, and that's kind of what you're quite often trying to achieve.
Yeah, so some ways to mitigate that complexity. I mean, it is complex. You have to look at a lot of things: the overall result of your app, the search on your terms, the CTR on the other terms. Like it's not simple. One way to like kind of try to measure this a bit more precisely or to seize the effect could be to run not all in or all at the same. If you run an ongoing budget of the same budget every day for a year, it's going to be harder to measure than if for a 3-week time you've got like a concentrated campaign that goes bigger and like in time. I also often use different geographies, so I try to look for what I call lookalikes country, a country of a relative similar size and maybe price, maybe penetration of my own app. It's not only for Apple Search Ads, but within you. And in one, I would run displacement, and the other I would not. I try to like have. So let's say to try, because the effect is not so easy to measure, to triangulate it with like kind of this proxy that are definitely not perfect. I mean, it's not because you pause and start or because you run one in France and the other not in Germany that it's going to be obvious. But usually it does help a little bit figuring out what's really happening with the hidden effect of more awareness placement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good shout, actually. I think, yeah, that's something people can use to create something similar to an A/B testing opportunity within Apple Search Ads. But I mean, I guess circling back slightly, we've sort of alluded to this slightly throughout our kind of conversation, but do you feel that kind of Apple Search Ads has a ceiling, or kind of how far you can push it?
Well, I guess there is, because everything has a ceiling. Like I even remembering saying myself, I don't have enough human beings, not only on Search Ads, but also on other very large platform. At some point, I don't know. I was checking yesterday one particular app, and we're doing 5 million ad impression a day on a country that I don't know what's the overall iOS population, but maybe let's say 100 million. or a group of country. I'm like, so it means that if everybody sees my ad once in 20 days, I've exhausted the pool of people. Like every channel has a ceiling, but I also think nobody has reached it, or maybe Candy Crush has, or maybe Uber has. But I think for the 99.99% of us, we haven't reached it. The ceiling, like we said, is how much you've explored. So in terms of terms, in terms of placement, and how much you're willing to put on how much you're willing to put on it, like how you measure, how aggressive you are into buying this visibility. And this almost always is the limiting factor, like how far you're willing to take the risk before you know if it's actually coming back or not. I think that's the real ceiling. It's the one we put on ourselves. Even like there's always, I mean, in search, obviously, the ceiling is easier to find locally, but with the Today tab in particular, I don't know if there's really a ceiling. There's one particular example, I'm not sure I want to get into too much detail, in a small geography where I know one particular advertiser. I don't know their share of voice on the Today tab ads in this geography, but it's insane. Like I check, and like more than 9 out of 10 times that I would check, it's the same. And that's been for months. It's obviously a smaller geography with like less competitive. But if you think about a market like the US, which a lot of subscription apps are very focused on the US market, like the inventory is really massive. Like the amount of users that are opening the app store every week, every day, is definitely much bigger than whatever any advertiser can afford. Like even a Candy Crush or a Clash of Clans cannot exhaust the Today tab ceiling potential, I believe.
Yeah, and I think I know we've kind of spoken slightly around related data as well, but it's absolutely essential people are being conscious of capitalizing on when there is increased volume in the App Store. And it could be as simple as when it's rainy outside, people use their phones more, or vice versa. And I know we've spoken about this before, but people don't always fully utilize data both on and off of the App Store. What's kind of been your experience around that?
Yeah, I mean, some verticals typically have an intraday seasonality or externalities, like weather would be one, but for example, bank holiday are another one. I was seeing an account recently, like every time there was a bank holiday, they were hitting their daily cap, and they didn't even see it because it only happens on one day, so they don't see it. But I looked over a period of months, of several months, and it was happening every time. Like this gets pretty advanced, and I think that a lot of adapters, they should not worry too much about that because they haven't exploited what they should focus on first. So like don't there's a progression line. No, you should not get to the final boss if you haven't done the tutorial, like in an extreme manner. When you start having it explode quite a bit, and you're having this kind of plateau, I'm not finding any more volume, I'm not finding any more performance, I think there are always deeper things that you can start doing. And looking at intraday seasonality, for example, is one. Looking at externalities for the weather. I was a long time ago advising a startup that was doing bid modifier based on weather updated every 5 minutes through an API, and basically we're selling movies. So every time it would start to rain, we would bid higher because we know people get at home and they're stuck. And whenever they're out and they would see our ads, nobody wants to look at a movie when they're in the park. So we would change the bid on that. And I realized how many external events there are, talking to the founder of this company who was showing to me like specific verticals have different externalities. For some, it's the weather. For some, it's the time of the day. For some, is there's a football game at this hour. Even I was looking at a data set with AppsFlyer during the World Cup of what's happening in the halftime of the games. And I was actually game changing in terms of how many people are actually on their phone, whether it's in the App Store or on Instagram or on TikTok or looking for a flight ticket or whatever. But like the gap is not like there's not 10 or 20% more in this case. Like it was like going from 1 to 3. Like it was really depends a lot the vertical you're in, obviously, and each will have their externality. So don't try to optimize for every single one of them because it's going to be useless. Goes for the high variance. Like there are some things where the weather doesn't matter so much, and so on. I think those pretty advanced tactics, they are good when you reach a level of maturity. They're not for, don't do this at home, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and to be honest, and these things get even more complicated in Apple search ads when you've got latency periods and how quickly your updates get applied, and you have to kind of start factoring all of this stuff in. I mean, we generally wouldn't advise making changes more than sort of every 4 to 6 hours, just to actually give it time for the dust to settle.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're throwing too much into the pot, and you're not going to actually get a useful kind of read off the back of that.
Yeah, I've seen one case of a food delivery company that was changing the bids at every lunchtime and dinner time, and it's true that it wasn't as instant as they would think. And even though the hypothesis was really solid because they've observed it in their own behavior data, making it viable on the platform when there is a delay of a few hours, sometimes it can get counterproductive to be too small, and you have to keep it simple in some cases.
Always important to keep it simple. And so, I mean, kind of getting towards the end of the session, there was a couple of bits I think would be useful to kind of touch on. One of those is what could Apple do, or Apple search ads in particular do, to help overcome some of the challenges of scaling?
I think there's one, I mean, the conversation is interesting and leads to different ways, but there's one thing that we haven't touched on. So what they could do, like I might have a couple of ideas, but there's one thing they have done that I've been advocating for like 10 years and waiting for it. And suddenly we have it like for about a year and a half now, which are the CPP, the custom product pages. And to put it for maybe people who are not super aware of what a CPP is, for 10 years in the App Store, developers have to show the exact same thing to everybody, no matter where they come from, what they've seen before, are they looking for different terms. And basically it was this bottleneck of mobile where, I mean, on a website, on a landing page, you can show whatever you want depending on where people come from. And we had this limitation, and Apple really, I think it's really a huge improvement for everyone, in the sense that CPP enable you to showcase something different to different users. So I typically had the case for a very long time where I was in a health and fitness app that was doing both fitness and nutrition related products. Some people would believe in our vision, which is you can only get healthy if you do both, but the reality is a lot of people, they only want to train and not change their diet, or they only want to diet, but they don't really want to do any workout. And so we had this thing where we're selling both of it at the same time, and it would put people off. It's a fairly basic case, but there's lots of them like this, like a travel app that is doing flights and rental cars. Or I was discussing with a friend of mine who was managing a buy and rent a house, and you're showing both. So the CPP, they really allowed to be more relevant for what people are looking for. And I think even though they're a year and a half now, they're vastly underutilized. The reason I say it's beneficial for everybody is that it's beneficial for the user because it matches what they want to see. It's beneficial for the advertiser in the sense of, if you manage to raise this relevancy, people are clicking more on your ad, it's very likely that you're going to grab more volume and potentially at a lower price. So definitely a good one. So I think this product was like a really a game changer in terms of what they could do. Now we can go one step further. I don't want to only look at the back. And one thing that I really wish to have is a deep link on these custom product pages, because if I know that user has looked for renting a car, and they open my app, and so he's looked for rent a car. I tell him, yeah, you can rent a car with me. Open the app, and the first thing they see is, do you want to buy a car or rent a car? They're like, dude, I just told you twice. Like, I look for it, and then I click on you, and you're asking me again. It's kind of, we look a bit stupid to the user, right? Like, kind of, what I want here is, again, to improve the relevancy, but also the experience for user, like how seamless it is. Like, cool, I wanted that, I get it. And I can give them something better. I can personalize what I show them. I can really make them like a just better experience for everybody. So I really hope that we can get deep link that enable me in the app to personalize the experience based on what they've searched for and what I've shown them before. Because right now we have this problem of the bottleneck again. It says, okay, in the App Store, they've seen what they were looking at, but they get into my app and we're back to step one, especially for apps that are maybe not super apps, but have different, let's say, different USP or different segments of user. The way fitness apps cater to genders is very different, for instance. Or I have an app where the traffic comes from kids and parents. And obviously the onboarding is really different. Like the kids want to play immediately. The parents want to tell us what they want the kids to learn for a little bit. And so I wish we can have deep links. So that would be one on my wish list, a pretty big one. Yeah, what else? I'm curious about what new placement they have, but I'm not sure I have the perfect ID here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where they go next on the placement front. I mean, they've obviously got options around broadening it out from search ads. I know that's been alluded to in other places, that maybe it'll start feeding into Apple News, Apple TV, all of these things. They're obviously growing quite a good multimedia framework there. I think that deep linking kind of thing is really important, and you can kind of see why some brands have had to go down the route of having like a invest in crypto app and an invest in stocks and shares app, because it's not a smooth transition for people. They've got to send them off to different parts, and what happens is people drop off later down the funnel. So I think
I've got a similar case with a language learning app, and that app has a really long tail. Like obviously most people, they want to learn English, Spanish, Chinese, like Portuguese, big language. There's millions of people who want to learn secondary language. This app, for example, is promoting Welsh as a learning. And okay, there might be not a lot of search for learn Welsh, but there's a lot of search for, I mean, there's a lot of language in this world. And when you arrive in the app, the list of language they offer is really long. Like they've got, I don't know, 50 language or something. And as a user, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to scroll through all of that. Like, and yeah, the experience is really bad. So I think there are so many use cases where deep link makes sense for the user, and that I really wish we get there. Yeah.
Well, hopefully that's something that will come in the future. I mean, I guess we've kind of looked at this in terms of from the side of the advertising platform as to what they can do to help. Let's kind of flip it around, I guess. And if we were kind of talking to the brands, what could they do to kind of remove some of the scaling obstacles you face as a kind of as a consultant? That'd be kind of quite interesting to hear, really.
One is setting expectations. I mean, if somebody is coming to me from a vertical with very low search and their account is spending 5K a month and they're thinking that they're going to start spending 6 digits because I'm a magician, the first thing is I set expectation. Like that's always the first thing. Second is also understanding what limits they put to themselves. And I talked before about how high they're able to bid, but inside the account, you notice there are always some limits that maybe the caps are reached, but maybe they also use the targeting options. So Apple Search Ads enable you to target by gender or by age, which is very relevant for a few apps. The thing is, there's over 80% that have the ads personalization turn off. I think the number Apple share was 82%, or 78%. 78%. So that means that if you're putting this kind, and it can be very relevant. I had a fitness app recently. They tell me, look, women convert twice as much as men, so we're going to only bid on women. I'm like, yeah, but then it means you're bidding on not half of the population, but half of this 22% of opt-in for personalization. So basically, your ceiling is 11% of whoever searched for fitness in the App Store. Like, you're putting yourself a huge burden on your here. And it's true that you might be more relevant if you can cater for this experience. But in this case, I mean, we were going from 100 to 11%. I was like, guys, we're never going to do anything if we don't remove that. So I often look at removing cautiously, but like caps and targeting, you obviously want to look at how it goes and the performance. You have to be on top of it. There's work to do. But like first, removing barriers. Like and the second one, and we touched a little bit about it before, but like, I saw an account recently and they're like, we've done all we could. There's no scale on Apple Search Ads. I opened the account. They had 5 keywords. I was like, okay, Here, there's a lot of things we haven't explored. And it's going to adjacent services. In some cases, I don't want to give the trick because it worked for me so many times, but like betting on foreign language, even within a country. And I'll take the very obvious example, which is in the States, I don't have the exact number, but like, let's say maybe a fifth of users who are actually searching in Spanish because there's a huge amount of Hispanics and they used to, and you're only betting on the English keyword and you're leaving all this inventory on the side. So there's lots of ways you can expand your keyword pool. And I think that's definitely one other way of exploring. So say expectations, then removing the obstacles, and then digging and digging and digging, and there's always more. Obviously, the fourth pillar is for those who are only doing the search. Let's revisit this new placement. Maybe let's measure them differently than just direct return, like we commented before. So I'd say that's pretty much a good summary here with these 4 pillars, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's the only other point to add in. I know you always speak about this, which is don't panic. As soon as if you lose your app ranking, don't immediately go and kind of hammer the bids to try and win it back. It might be a natural ebb and flow in the evolution of that keyword. So yeah, I mean, obviously you can say it better than me, but don't panic is key.
Yeah, but it's true that in an ideal world, things are running smooth and it's all on autopilot. But the reality is never like this. And I think here it's don't panic so you make the better choice, but also don't panic so that you see the bigger picture. And it's not only about avoiding to make a wrong bid decision, but it's also about stopping for a second and thinking, why is this moving? Is this something that's happening outside an externality? Is this a competitor? Is it just me? I don't know. I had an app like a huge competitor, a very well-known brand, and their server fucked up for 2 hours. And we had a massive amount of search for alternatives for these 2 hours. It's just like these things happen, but they're great to understand so that maybe you prepare for the next time, at least you know. It's just not being heads down into the account and oh, what's happening? My budget reached cap. I should change the bids, and kind of trying to understand why is this happening? Why are users behaving differently? Why is my KPI dropping? Why is this going up? More than, I mean, obviously you want to do, what do I do with it? And you need to course correct and you don't want to lose money, but it's good to take a step back and start thinking. Mostly because then you're ready in a better way for next time it happens and you're prepared. Playing the long game, basically.
Thanks, Thomas. And yeah, thanks for everyone that's kind of tuned in to listen today.